Now, this is a topic I have been meaning to cover for a while now. The Last of Us Part 1 remake has very mixed reactions from the internet. Okay, cool. Actually, before I get too far into this, hit the like button, subscribe button. This is the kind of content I'm making on YouTube now, where I'm going to be providing my commentary on gaming and other internet videos that bubble their way up to the top of my timeline to the extent that I'm going to make a video about it. So let's jump into it.
The Last of Us. There is no denying the critical acclaim that this game has received over the years. It's also a game that is going to come out for the third time now. The first time it came out was back in June of 2013 when it shipped for the PlayStation 3. Then came The Last of Us Remastered for PlayStation 4, which launched on July 29th, 2014. You may recall that game was set to launch at full price, but then last minute it did get a $10 price drop, so it went from $60 to $50, and those who pre-order digitally, they did get a $10.
Okay, so I'm going to say this before I get too much further in the video, and I'm going to be kind of stopping and starting it as I go, but I actually have never played Last of Us. I've seen the hype and kind of like what Yang was talking about. I know it's a very popular and beloved game, but I've actually never played it, so I didn't know about this detail regarding the refund. I just assumed that it came out for PS3 for 60 bucks or whatever the price was, and then PS4 same thing. And I guess we're going to be getting into it, but $70 for the PS5
refund when that price drop happened. Even back then, I recall there were arguments surrounding the price point of Last of Us Remastered, given that sure it looked better than the original, but it was still just a re-release of the original game, and there was no upgrade path from what I recall to boot. And now we're seeing sort of that same conversation cropping up again with the release of The Last of Us Part 1, aka The Last of Us Remake, which was announced back in June of 2022 during Summer Game Fest.
Right.
And you can see right here some of the changes that they advertised in the blog post.
I wonder if he's going to...
They've implemented modernized gameplay,
he's going to talk about
expanded accessibility options. And then beyond that, you've got effects, exploration, and combat that have all been enhanced. Scrolling further down, you'll find comparison images, and looking at them, yeah, you can definitely see there have been some improvements in visual fidelity.
I don't know.
Character models,
$70 though?
Environments and whatnot. Definitely can tell there are improvements on that front. And this is actually, these cutscenes are actually pre-rendered, whereas the graphics here, this is real time on PlayStation 5. Nobody's denying that it's ultimately going to be a good game because it is still just The Last of Us, which is a phenomenal game, one of my favorites and many people's favorites. But there is an argument surrounding whether this game is worth the $70 price tag,
here we go,
the marked up price tag of this generation of consoles. And beyond that, they're selling digital deluxe editions that are worth $80, and this Firefly edition that's $100.
I won't be pausing too often, because I want to complete his thoughts before I interject my thoughts. But yeah, $70. I'm going to give my overall opinion. I mean, you can probably tell from just my tone how I might come across. I'm going to save it till the end. But $70 for a game that's come out 3 times, okay? Or I guess twice.
One factor that's especially making people question whether this package is worth $70 is the fact that the multiplayer mode will not be included with The Last of Us Part 1. There isn't a remastered or remade version of that multiplayer mode. It's just a single-player campaign, unlike previous Last of Us releases, though Naughty Dog is working on a full-fledged standalone multiplayer game that's going to be a spin-off of The Last of Us.
Yeah, they talked about that.
But
Summer Game Fest as well.
It doesn't change the fact that they're charging $70 for what is ultimately a diminished overall package with The Last of Us Part 1. And yes, the graphics do look beautiful and there are definitely enhancements there, but people were hoping for the price point to at the very least stick to $60. The final saving grace would be if combat and gameplay mechanics have been modernized, if they have included things from Last of Us Part 2 like going prone and dodging and whatnot. But based on the latest gameplay trailer, it would seem as though that stuff won't be in The Last of Us Part 1. In fact, overall moment-to-moment gameplay mechanics, and features don't look all that different from previous Last of Us releases, which further diminishes the value of Part 1 in people's eyes, which is why if you go to the Last of Us Part 1 Rebuild for PlayStation 5 video that came out recently on July 21st, 2022,
I wanted to kind of say, I don't know if you'll play some of that.
Goes through an overview of the changes that you can expect from this package. You'll see that the likes to dislikes ratio
okay, so that's where you got it
at
from.
all,
okay,
with 85,000 upvotes and 54,000 downvotes. So you can see right here very mixed reception. And looking at the comments, you can see that a lot of the complaints that I discussed are brought.
Let me see some of these. Hefty price tag, but the game looks incredible. I hope the gameplay and enemy AI is on par with how it was until Last of Us 2. This looks pretty cool in my opinion, especially with the haptic of the controller, but like everyone else, it's the price that I'm unsure about. Okay. I mean, that's got to be the biggest thing, right?
Up once again, hefty price tag, but the game does look incredible. I hope the gameplay and enemy AI is on par with how it was in Last of Us Part 2. I will patiently and eagerly wait for this to go on sale. It looks really great, but I simply can't justify spending 100 Canadian dollars on a game that I've played multiple times and that has released multiple times. Scrolling down further, here's somebody else saying it's interesting they didn't include the gameplay elements within combat as they had in Last of Us Part 2. I feel like that would have been a worthy inclusion and heightened the gameplay aspect of this remake and in turn enhance the value in the eyes of the public. Here's another similar comment with 11,000 upvotes. It definitely looks better, but the price tag is pretty high despite this being one, if not my favorite video game of all time. And then there are some folks who will bring up the fact that this package doesn't even include a multiplayer mode. Looks beautiful. It's a mistake not to enhance combat, not to add Last of Us Part 2 elements like, again, prone and dodging. And the lack of the multiplayer mode is mentioned here, some kind of enhanced version of that included in the package combined with enhancements and modernizations to combat that would...
I don't know if he'll talk about this in this video, but I think something else that kind of comes to mind when I think about gaming is that it seems to me, and this is kind of off the top of my head, I'm not really looking anything up right now, that developers and maybe publishers by extension, I guess they just see multiplayer as the monetization scheme, right? Like, we're going to make our money through the multiplayer, so the single player will have like its own price and the multiplayer will have just like microtransactions or some sort of way to consistently get money. Because it seems like in the game that's coming to mind, and hopefully it works like this for the sake of my point, is that I feel like Halo's like that, right? Like, I think the Halo multiplayer is technically free, but then the game, which is, or maybe this is how it worked, the single player game is what cost money, and the idea is like they think of the multiplayer as something that will get them money over time, so they're kind of giving you this free entry point. And it seems like a lot of developers are kind of seeing it that way. Like, maybe they cut off the multiplayer because either it was going to take too long to add that onto the game, or like a lot of developers, they're just kind of thinking, well, the thing that people like about this game is the story of The Last of Us and less so the multiplayer, and we can get this out here sooner if it wasn't attached. And I also do have some other thoughts as far as like why this remake is happening at all, but I'm going to wait for him to kind of cover more details about it.
Would have made it worth that $70. It would have felt more like a proper, more full-fledged remake rather than a graphics remake with gameplay that's still similar.
I don't know. I just don't think developers see it that way.
Different when you play the final.
I feel like Assassin's Creed. That happened with Assassin's Creed. They cut off.
The likes to dislikes ratio is even worse if you look at
multiplayer in those games.
There's gameplay and enhancements overview on other.
And they still sold
like
for the same
IGN
price.
Here, whose likes to dislikes ratio is 9.7 thousand upvotes and 12,000 downvotes. More downvotes than upvotes. Same for GameSpot's re-upload with 1.1 thousand upvotes and 2.1 thousand upvotes. And the comments of both pretty much relay and echo the same things we've seen in the PlayStation.
Unacceptable. $70 is unacceptable.
Let's actually take a look at this gameplay overview and enhancements overview. I'll skip around through the magic of editing. Right here, you can kind of see that the visual enhancements are definitely there, but they don't really talk about.
Okay, cool. So he is going to cover the video because I was like, I don't want to watch this video separately.
Inclusions of Last of Us Part 2 features, which I get why that might disappoint some people. So here we go.
I'm coming. We're working on those flashbacks within that scene for the first game. We got excited with the idea of like, oh man, what if we made The Last of Us Part 1 to look as good, if not better, than what we have done with Last of Us Part 2.
The tech of the
that looks pretty good.
It's like an open box of tools and goodies. 4K, HDR, improved haptics, 60 frames, reimagine The Last of Us.
The only thing I'm going to kind of comment on there before Young jumps back in with his commentary is that, and this is kind of alluding to how I feel ultimately about, you know, this game as well as $7 games in general. I don't think that that's worth $70. I'm not talking specifically about Last of Us. I'm talking about the jump $10 extra for essentially haptic feedback controller functionality and graphics. You know, I don't think that that's really worth it. And I feel like the fact, and also the fact that other game, maybe not publishers, but developers are putting in those features at no extra cost is kind of the ultimate indicator that, well, this doesn't actually cost more money. So if you keep harping on that as like, look, haptic feedback, ray tracing, 60 FPS, things that the console can already do, I don't know. It seems almost a little bit disingenuous and almost like a lie to say that, like, this is why it costs more money. This is why we're doing this again.
I mean, there are definitely across the board improvements.
Opportunities to rebuild our characters.
The foliage has been enhanced. The lighting, the animations definitely do look better.
I mean down to the irises and the pupil depth.
This game does look gorgeous.
Aside from that, the facial animation is just way more believable. Like all the nuances, all the little subtle.
See, and everything they're talking about, is this really worth going back and doing this again?
All of it almost close.
I would say no, but again, I have an idea as to why that's the case, and I'm going to reveal it later.
Stick to me like glue, like glue. Got it. Good.
Have the highest fidelity characters in the cutscene, but also in gameplay. It's the same character, so now we can do these seamless transitions in and out. Every part of the game has benefited from seamless transitions. And
right, it's no longer from pre-rendered cutscene to gameplay. It's now like all in-engine, so.
Our stories happen in gameplay, on a stick.
She knew my mom.
Now some of this stuff, it's harder to tell the difference.
Constantly in this world.
Like some of those in-game side-by-sides.
Yeah, the in-game ones, you almost can't tell.
Or the specific scenes they showed, but I mean, once you get up close to stuff, that's when the differences really become apparent.
I would agree.
One of the
and we look at vistas
things that the PlayStation 5 is really enabling is that we're able to have a density of physics objects in a scene that we could never do before. Bumpables, chippables, breakables, destructible objects in a scene just makes the world feel rich, makes it feel lived in. Materials can have the properties that you'd expect. The turret truck in Pittsburgh.
Last of Us Part 2 did have some of the best glass I'd ever seen in video games.
The concrete and sending objects flying.
In terms of the physics and how they respond.
Break. Like there's fear. There's a real fear that it invokes.
So seeing that in Part 1's pretty cool.
It's giving us a much more dynamic range of gameplay to play with.
I don't know. It's going to be tricky not to like
our AI tech has just
almost like criticize
incredibly
everything they're saying. Like just pick it apart.
The fundamental knowledge model of how these NPCs.
Because I think everything that they're saying is valid, and I think that it works as a first-time experience. So I guess maybe if someone's coming into this game, I guess if somebody's coming into Last of Us Part 1 Remake, and it's their first time playing it, and they don't know anything about the game, and I guess I'll reveal this now, they could be people who have watched the TV series, and so they go, wow, this TV series is pretty cool, and they go get the remake, especially if, like, maybe the other one gets delisted, that'd be weird, but they go get the remake, then yeah, this being their first experience, it'd probably be an amazing one. I also feel like, and I don't know if it'll get mentioned in this video, they're also probably making the changes that they're making specifically so that like the remake Part 1 matches up a little bit more into Part 2, and then from there that'll kind of link into Part 3 a bit easier.
You how intense that fight feels, it's so much more rewarding coming out of it from the other side.
I actually have a friend who played Last of Us on the PS3, played it on the PS4, and I asked him about this, and he said he would not get it on the PS5. Not for $70.
Has this very sophisticated
So,
understanding of like, okay,
and there's only one person I know. I only know one person, so it's just.
We not only have exposure,
But that guy is not really super dialed into video game news, so to know that like even he saw it, and he's a huge Last of Us guy. For him to see it, he was just like, I'm not interested.
And maintain that feeling of stealth much more believably.
Or try to foreshadow the enemy's next movements.
Another motion matching. Motion matching is this technology that's basically using logic that tries to match the desired movement to a bucket of hundreds of animations. A mocapped actor has gone in and run
I kind of
really
talked about this a bit earlier, but I think something like what he's talking about now would have worked a whole lot better on just a Part 3. Like, because that's oftentimes what developers do, right? They say like, here's where we were in Part 1 on the PS3, PS4. Here's what we went and did in Part 2. and then
First, we
here's
just
where
have
we
to
are in part 3.
build
Here's
that
everything
core
we've learned. But
experience.
to go
And then beyond
backwards
that,
and then
we
be like,
wanted
oh,
to
let's
add
revamp this in
several
the older
features that
one.
fans
I don't
have
know.
been asking for.
Photo
For
mode.
example,
Okay.
we now have a permadeath mode.
Permadeath.
Along that, we've added a brand new speedrun mode, so players can time themselves. There's a whole community of gamers that just want to see
That's
how
pretty cool.
fast they can play through this game. Beyond that, we added a bunch more of unlockables. So there's all these different
Cosmetic
outfits for
customization.
Ellie and Joel that people can unlock. A model viewer mode, so people can really appreciate the details. We added award-winning accessibility features.
Every
That's dope.
single
Last of Us Part 2's accessibility
option that we
features
offer,
are above and
that's a
beyond.
barrier removed for someone.
So to see that here is really cool to make it more accessible to.
She steps past the couch. He wears the wristwatch Sarah gifted him, which now has a cracked face.
To my knowledge, this
To
is
folks
the
who
first
don't have-
PlayStation
Wow.
game that has audio description built into the
Certain
game.
You know what? I'm coming around. That
Now it's nighttime. Joel stirs in his sleep.
that
That's
voiceover
really
might
cool.
be
We tried
enough
to
for like
push
the 70
frontier of
bucks.
accessibility on this game.
These character models and animations do look damn impressive.
That's a lot of
And
work.
yeah,
So
this
much
environment
I,
does look
maybe
beautiful.
maybe
The
they already
Last
had
of
that
Us is the
ready to
world.
go, but
We
the thing that
revamped
won't sell me, I don't think this will ever work on
completely
me,
the
is
art
simply,
direction.
hey, look,
You
this
know,
game looks
everything
better.
from
We redid the same
these
game, but just made it look
expansive
better.
vistas that
Give me
not
$10
only
more.
are they beautiful, but you feel the environments. You feel the environments in a much more visceral way. The rooftops overlooking the Capitol building, for example, like just the breath of fresh air when you go up there and you just like, you feel that sort of release in tension. And then, you know, to juxtapose that down in the tunnels in Wilds, and you get that dank, flooded tunnel feel, that humidity, you can actually feel it. All these
Okay, I don't know about
environments are just
that.
completely reimagined.
It does look
Now we
nice,
got
but
our engine on the PS5.
feeling the moisture of the
3D
video
audio.
game
I also
assets.
feel like just do that in a
Creates
third
much
game,
more
man.
immersive and
It does
because of
look
that
good,
much
though,
more
but come
emotional
on.
experience.
One of the things I absolutely love with the 3D audio in The Last of Us Part 1 is being able to hear an enemy before they sneak up on you. Skitter around in a different room and you're hearing them trying to get it behind you. Really heightens that sense of just being grounded. You are in this character, you are in this world. The amount of control that developers have over the DualSense, it's really, really cool. The way it works with the bow is that at the very beginning when they're starting...
Haptic feedback and adaptive triggers, of course.
And then as the bow gets tauter and tauter, the amount of resistance is increasing. And then when you release the bow, you're also getting that resistance going out of the trigger. Haptic vibration on the pump of the shotgun. And what's much more sophisticated about that on the DualSense is that, and those two beats is what you're going to feel on the controller.
This looks like a good spot.
This also ties in to the new Workbench Animations. So if you're seeing Joel taking apart a gun or screwing something in or putting a new stock on a gun, that moment where he's like jamming that on, you're going to get that haptic feedback on that. We have, you know, haptics all across the board, you know, for all the moments you kind of expect, for clambering, jumping, landing, meleeing, getting meleeed, like all those kind of
I mean, I kind of went
high-intensity
into this
moments we
thinking, like,
have
you know,
represented in the haptics.
they didn't.
When Joel
How much
goes
work
in
could they
pet
really
the
put in?
giraffe,
I mean,
getting
it's a
that
lot.
little
It's a
light
lot.
touch on the haptics as he's petting the giraffe.
You can
To me,
feel
that's
the fur on the
essence of
giraffe.
The Last of Us. It's the high tension moments. It's the low tension moments.
I do love this
all
scene,
of it
though.
Feeling.
So is that everything you hoped for?
Jury's still out.
Playing as Joel and Ellie on this journey, then to take that experience and really honor it and keep the authenticity of it, but elevate it in every way possible, whether it's pipeline, whether it's art direction, whether it's a technology, everything that allows us to make that experience better. Not different, extremely better. That's why, to me, this is the definitive way to play The Last of Us.
September 2nd, 2022. This is probably going to be the definitive version of The Last of Us 1. I do think that the developers are putting a lot of work into this. I don't think this is like a lazy cash grab. It's more just people do feel it's a little overpriced given what it does exclude from previous 2 releases, and the fact that the gameplay itself doesn't look like, on a mechanical level, doesn't look all that different. We don't get some of those new features we got in part 2. Even within the category of remakes, there is a spectrum. You know, there's Final Fantasy VII Remake, which is like all the way to the top end of remakes. I mean, that's like a proper remake, not just in combat and mechanics and visuals, but also in where the story is headed. It's just kind of gone in its own.
I was going to wonder if he's going to bring up a Resident Evil 2 remake, to a lesser extent Resident Evil 3 remake, but one of the remakes that comes to mind, I guess it doesn't have remake in the title, but we know it to be a remake, is Resident Evil 2. I mean, that's kind of more or less the same story, but it's such a different game than the one on the PS1. And something that I would imagine in the next 5 minutes, you know, Yang is probably going to cover is, you know, the fact that this game had already come out so soon on the PS4, which is also not that soon, but at the same time, it kind of is, because it was on the previous generation. It seems like in other instances, remakes that might be a bit more prominent or something that's like, you know, a little bit older than just the previous generation.
Direction sort of in that area are also Resident Evil 2 and 3 remake.
There it
They're
is.
not as drastic of a remake as FF7 remake, because the stories are relatively still true to the original, though obviously they still change aspects of how things are paced and whatnot. But those are two games whose gameplay and visual are very...
I want to quickly say about that, I have a theory, and obviously this is the Last of Us video, so I'm not going to dwell on Resident Evil 2 much. I wouldn't be surprised if Resident Evil 2, so it got its remake, and then 3 got its remake, and while not, again, not a Resident Evil video, but with 4 getting a remake, I wouldn't be surprised if Capcom's weirdly trying to kind of like change parts of the story with where they want to go with Resident Evil down the road. And so they need older stuff to kind of be rewritten in order for the things that maybe they want to do with beyond Resident Evil 8. Those will make more sense once they kind of rewrite some stuff from like 2, 3, 4, 5, and yes, even 6. But yeah, it's just kind of funny that he mentioned it.
Very, very different from the original Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3. So for those remakes, people can more easily justify a $70 price tag because they are so much more enhanced and different from the original, because they are proper remakes built from the ground up that try to represent
the
much
ground
of what
up
came
specifically,
before, but also completely push
with Last of Us, you're using existing
of
resources,
visuals, audio, gameplay, you name it. And then a category below that, I'd say, is something like Demon's Souls remake from Bluepoint, which is a very faithful remake.
Before he says it, I want to try. This is my new style, right? I'm going to pause it before he says something. I don't think this is worth $70. I really don't. I didn't think. I mean, granted, I didn't have a PlayStation 5 at the time. I do have a PlayStation 5, and once I got one, I did not buy Demon's Souls, and I didn't play the original Demon's Souls on the PS3 either. I do not think that that game is worth $70. And that actually does go with the rule that I mentioned a bit earlier, where I said a little bit older. So Demon's Souls isn't a PS4 game; it's a PS3 game. Not that it needs to be a PS2 game, but it's so almost shot for shot the same. All you're really paying for with the $70 is updated graphics, and technically no load screens, but I'll say it this way, and I think that this will be something that, as I make more videos like this will be iterated over and over. All of the things that you're getting in these games are things that the console is capable of doing. So because the console is capable of doing it, I don't necessarily think that that's worth the $10 extra. And I might make a whole different video kind of covering all that. But everything that you get that the developers are taking advantage of are things that they couldn't do on the PS4 that they can do on the PS5. So if they're taking advantage of the console, well, you've already paid the money for the console to get access to things that the developers can now take advantage of on the console. So the idea that it's going to cost you an extra $10 extra for something that you could get on the PS4 doesn't make sense to me. But I digress.
Of the original, but the graphics are so much more enhanced, like it's just night and day, and there are enough gameplay modernizations where things just feel smoother. And then on the lower end of that spectrum is something like Shadow of Colossus remake by Bluepoint, which they did label a remake, but is fundamentally the same game. It's just the graphics.
I don't think that was $70 though.
What's been kind of touched up quite a bit and remade in a lot of ways. But that was a game that launched at a $40 price point, because the fundamental game was just basically the same. It's the fundamentally same framework that's just had a new coat of paint, a remade coat of paint from a graphic standpoint. So Shadow of Colossus Remake would have been harder to justify a full-fledged $60 price tag. So the fact that they lowered it really went a long way with people being able to like look at this remake and saying, maybe I'll buy this again. So where does Last of Us Part 1 fit in that spectrum? For me, I'd say it resides somewhere between Shadow of Colossus Remake and Demon Souls Remake, sort of somewhere in the middle there.
50 to 60?
The AI is nice. The addition of, you know, a timer for speedrunners and new features like permadeath and photo mode and accessibility, those are great. 2 thumbs up on that front. But whereas Demon Souls Remake did modernize the gameplay of the original Demon Souls quite a bit, where you could feel it, from what I'm seeing in the footage and from what a lot of people are getting from the trailer, and the fact that the gameplay overview didn't address moment-to-moment gameplay mechanics and features enhancements seems to indicate that when you get your hands on the controller, in terms of how the game plays, it's overall gonna feel like just
how it plays is
Last of
the
Us
same.
1 we've already played, which is why a lot of people are getting the impression that while Last of Us Part 1 Remake does feel like more of a remake than Shadow of Colossus Remake, it doesn't quite feel like it's still worth $70. I think $60 is where it should have been at. $50 maybe, because of the lack of that multiple.
I think another thing worth obviously bringing up towards the end here is, I mean, PlayStation Studios is committed to this. They mentioned, you know, and this kind of came into the backpedaling on Horizon Forbidden West being $70 as opposed to $60, was that on the PS5, was that they said that if it's a PlayStation Studios game, that it's going to be $70. I mean, I don't think that he's going to cover that in the next 2 minutes. Maybe Young will, but that's kind of the thing that's, I think we can't forget about, is that they committed to that. So while companies like Square Enix with Forspoken can charge $70 because they're just like, whatever, this is going to cost you $70, there was an expectation that the reason Sony PlayStation was going with $70 was because they had said, if it's a PlayStation Studios game, it will cost $70. Now, almost immediately after saying that, Miles Morales came out, and I think it was $40 on the PlayStation 5, I think. But yeah, that was the exception, and I guess that justification was like it was a smaller game than, you know, Marvel's Spider-Man. But yeah, I mean, I know that people can, you know, explain, you know, Shadow of the Colossus or, you know, Demon Souls, wherever the case is, but ultimately, if it's a PlayStation Studios game, it seems like it's going to be $70. And then everybody else out there can do their own $70 games for their own justifications, like Square Enix and Forspoken, but they're committing to that.
Player mode, or at the very least offer an upgrade path for those who have purchased previous releases of Last of Us, give them a discount. Something like that would have kind of helped smooth.
That's a weird one though, because if you say discount, that would be tricky, because I believe Last of Us is one of the PlayStation Collection games as well, which you can get for free if you just have PlayStation Plus, right? It's bundled into your subscription service. So that would be weird if, like, yeah, I don't even want. My mind is going to have to do some gymnastics in order to make that make sense. Because if you just sign up for PlayStation Plus, and even if you get like a year PlayStation Plus subscription, Last of Us Remastered is bundled into your subscription, so you wouldn't really have an upgrade path at that point. But then, and that also opens up a can of worms. Like, why would you pay $70 if you could? Oh, 70! It drives me crazy. It's 70 because it's like if you have the PlayStation Plus subscription, the game is right there for free because it's bundled into your subscription. But then on top of that, you're gonna pay $70 to get the same. All right, whatever. Getting too worked up about it.
Feedback surrounding Last of Us Part 1. Now, I've also seen the argument put out there, what if FromSoft came out with a Bloodborne remake whose gameplay was basically fundamentally the same, but the graphics and audio and all these things, that's the area where they concentrated on when it comes to
I think it'd be $70.
And they priced that $70. I feel like with that game, a lot of people would be still very excited. Maybe some might complain about the price point, but because that's been such a highly demanded enhancement, you know, a lot of people would definitely dig it. And I think it's just a matter of perspective, because with Bloodborne, that game shipped with 30 frames per second, a stuttery 30 FPS at that, and we haven't gotten a remastered for that like Last of Us 1 did. And so that remake would feel maybe substantial enough and would be exciting enough that maybe people would be willing to shell out $70 for it. With Last of Us Part 1, I think it's both the fact that this game has already been re-released once, and the fact that overall it is a less feature-complete package with that lack of multiplayer. Demon's Souls Remake, you look at that game, and the multiplayer component is there. It is feature-complete. It does have everything the original game had and more, whereas Last of Us Part 1 is missing a little piece, and it doesn't feel so different from the original release compared to how different Demon's Souls Remake feels from its original release. So that's kind of where the general conversation's at, and different people are going to have different opinions. Some folks who just love Last of Us 1 are going to be excited to pay $70 for this, but for others who still love the game, who have played this game over and over again, and who have purchased this game twice already, they're like, look, give us a break here, sell this at a cheaper price point, or give us an upgrade path, given that overall this is kind of the same game. So that's everything you need to know about the discourse surrounding Last.
All right. So, yeah, I mean, that's pretty much, I kind of sprinkled in my opinions throughout the video. Ultimately, I don't really feel like there's any game off the top of my head right now that's released for the PlayStation 5 that I think is worth $70. I mean, Horizon Forbidden West gets pretty close, but that I think is worth $70, in part because my overall thinking, and I'll probably repeat this in other videos that I make, is that I think that so long as the architecture by which you are working from is the PS4, I think that whatever you make that's released on dual consoles, right, or I guess generations, I don't think is worth that money. I don't. Now, the only game that really comes to mind, and this is kind of like my ending thoughts, the only game that really comes to mind that I think would be worth $70 if it got announced as such would be Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, because the developers have already talked about, one, it's not coming out on the PS4, and it's not coming out on the PS4 because the game is being developed and designed in such a way that it needs to be able to take advantage of the PS5 architecture. They cannot do it on the PS4. That's different than Last of Us. You can't say with Last of Us Remake, we couldn't do this on the PS4, because you did, and you actually did it on the PS3 also. So, but that's my overall opinion. I know Young doesn't necessarily, unless it's like EA or Ubisoft or Activision, provide his opinion when it comes to topics like this. I don't think he does usually. But my thinking is I don't necessarily think it's worth $70. I would say, you have a version of it that's bundled in your subscription. If you have PlayStation Plus, you can play that. But I think some of the comments that were mentioned, sprinkled in a little bit earlier about, getting it on a discount, sure. I think Sony PlayStation might hold out on that for a while. I think that they'll generally stick with trying to keep it at that $70 price tag like Demon's Souls was for as long a period as they can. But eventually, I never bought these games, but eventually Ratchet & Clank, Returnal, Demon's Souls, they did, go on sale for, at some point or another. So if that game can kind of dip to the percentage where it ends up being like $50, I'll say this. I think it'd be worth it. I've never played Last of Us. I know the story. I know generally what happens in both Last of Us, part 1 and part 2. But I think the amount of features that they put into the game, the amount of work that they put into the game. I was going to do this, and I thought about this before I recorded this video. If you type in, something that people have been saying about this game that I saw kind of floating around social media, just, cash grab, derogatory. A product designed primarily or solely with the intent of generating profits or money. Is Last of Us Part 1 remake Part 1, whatever, is that a cash grab? No, I don't think so. I think that as someone who doesn't buy these $70 games and someone who is actively would recommend to people, don't spend your money on these things because they're not necessarily worth it unless they're specifically built on the PS5 architecture and they don't exist on the PS4. If that were the case, then yes, I think it might be worth $70. In this instance, the amount of work that they put into it, I think you could have put that on a new game. The fact that you spent it on a game you already made, it's up to the user to decide. I don't think it's worth it, but I think that they probably did put at least $70 worth of changes into it. So that's my overall thoughts on Last of Us Part 1 Remake. Like I said, I won't necessarily be spending the money on it. I have a free version bundled into my subscription. that I can play if I wanted to, though I know the story, so I don't necessarily think I will play it. That's it for me. Check out my other videos, check out my social media. I'm going to be back later this week with more reaction, commentary content on, like I said, gaming videos, as well as any other videos that are crazy enough to bubble up through my timeline that I'm going to provide some commentary for. See ya.